The next morning, this is chapter 6 I'm starting with. The next morning when the children stumbled sleepily from their bedroom into the kitchen, rather than a note from Count Olaf, they found Count Olaf himself. "Good morning, orphans," he said. "I have your oatmeal all ready in bowls for you." The children took their seats at the kitchen table and stared nervously into their oatmeal. If you knew Count Olaf and he suddenly served you a meal, wouldn't you be afraid that there was something terrible in it, like a poison or ground glass? But instead, Violet, Klaus, and Sunny found that fresh raspberries had been sprinkled on top of each of their portions. The Boldwiller orphans hadn't had raspberries since their parents died, although they were extremely fond of them. "Thank you," Klaus said, carefully picking up one of the raspberries and examining it. Perhaps these were poison berries that just looked like the delicious ones. Count Olaf, seeing how suspicious Klaus was looking at the berries, smiled and plucked a berry out of Sunny's bowl. Looking at each of the three youngsters, he popped one in his mouth and ate it. "Aren't raspberries delicious?" he asked. "They were my favorite berries when I was your age." Violet tried to picture Count Olaf as a youngster, but couldn't. His shiny eyes, bony hands, and shadowy smile all seemed to be things only adults possess. Despite her fear of him, however, she took her spoon in her right hand and began to eat her oatmeal. Count Olaf had eaten some, so it probably wasn't poisonous. And, anyway, she was very hungry. Klaus began to eat too, as did Sunny, who got oatmeal and raspberries all over her face. "I received a phone call yesterday," Count Olaf said, "from Mr. Poe. He told me you children had been to see him." The children exchanged glances. They had hoped that their visit would be kept in confidence, a phrase here which means kept a secret between Mr. Poe and themselves, and not blabbed to Count Olaf. "Mr. Poe told me," Count Olaf said, "that you appear to have some difficulty adjusting into life, to the life I have graciously provided for you. I am very sorry to hear that." The children looked at Count Olaf. His face was very serious, as if he were very sorry to hear that, but his eyes were shiny and bright, the way they are when someone is telling a joke. "Is that so?" Violet said. "I'm sorry Mr. Poe bothered you." "I'm glad he did," Count Olaf said, "because I want the three of you to feel at home here, now that I am your father." The children shuddered a little at that, remembering their own kind father and gazing sadly at the poor substitute nesting across the table from them. "Lately," Count Olaf said, "I've been very nervous about my performances with the theater troupe, and I'm afraid I may have acted a bit standoffish." The word standoffish is a wonderful one, but it does not describe Count Olaf's behavior toward the children. It means reluctant to associate with others, and it might describe somebody who during a party would stand in a corner and not talk to anyone. It would not describe someone who provides one bed for 3 people to sleep in, forces them to do horrible chores, and strikes them across the face. There are many words for people like that, but standoffish is not one of them. Klaus knew the word standoffish and almost laughed out loud at Olaf's incorrect use of it. But his face still had a bruise on it, so Klaus remained silent. "Therefore, to make you feel a little more at home here, I would like to have you participate in my next play. Perhaps if you took part in the work I do, you will be less likely to run off complaining to Mr. Poe." "In what way would we participate?" Violet asked. She was thinking of all of the chores that they already did for Count Olaf, and was not in the mood to do more. What do you think Violet's afraid that they might have to do? Gianna, what do you think?
Like either they have to do something really hard.
Something really hard?
Clean up after everyone does it.
Clean up after the play? Clean up after everybody does it?
More chores.
More chores somehow? Do you think she's thinking that they're going to get an exciting part in the play? "Well," Count Olaf said, his eyes shining brightly, "the play is called The Marvelous Marriage, and is written by the great playwright Al Funcoot. We will only give one performance on this Friday night. It's about a man who is very brave and intelligent, played by me. In the finale, he marries the young, beautiful woman he loves in front of a crowd of cheering people. You, Klaus, and you, Sunny, will play some of the cheering people in the crowd." "But we're shorter than most adults," Klaus said. "Won't that look strange to the audience?" "You will be playing 2 midgets who attend the wedding," Olaf said patiently. "And what will I do?" Violet asked. "I am very handy with tools, so perhaps I could help you build the set." "Build the set? Heavens no," Count Olaf said. "A pretty girl like you shouldn't be working backstage." "But I'd like to," Violet said. Count Olaf's one eyebrow raised slightly, and the Boldwiller orphans recognized this sign of his anger. But then the eyebrow went down again as he forced himself to remain calm. But I have such an important role for you on stage, he said. You're going to play the young woman I marry. Violet felt her oatmeal and raspberries shift around in her stomach as if she had just caught the flu. It was bad enough having Count Olaf acting in loco parentis and announcing himself as their father. But to consider this man her husband, even for the purpose of a play, was even more dreadful. It's a very important role, he said, his mouth curling into an unconvincing smile. Although you have no lines other than I do, but you will say when Justice Strauss asks if you will have me. Justice Strauss, Violet said. What does she have to do with this? She has agreed to play the part of the judge, Count Olaf said. Behind him, one of the eyes painted over the kitchen walls closely watched over each of the Baudelaire children. I asked Justice Strauss to participate because I want to be neighborly as well as fatherly. Count Olaf, Violet said, but then stopped herself. She wanted to argue her way out of playing his bride, but she didn't want to make him angry. Father, she said, I'm not sure I'm talented enough to perform professionally. I would hate to disgrace your good name and the name of Al Funcoot. Plus, I'll be very busy over the next few weeks, working on my inventions and learning how to prepare roast beef. She added quickly, remembering how he had behaved about dinner. Count Olaf reached out one of his spidery hands and stroked Violet on the chin, looking deep into her eyes. You will, he said, participate in this theatrical performance. I'd prefer it if you would participate voluntarily. But, as I believe Mr. Poe explained to you, I can order you to participate, and you must obey. Olaf's sharp and dirty fingernails gently scratched on Violet's chin, and she shivered. The room was very, very quiet, as Olaf finally let go and stood up and left without a word. The Baudelaire children listened to his heavy footsteps go up the stairs to the tower they were forbidden to enter. Well, Klaus said hesitantly, I guess it won't hurt us to be in the play. It seems to be very important to him, and we want to keep on his good side. But he must be up to something, Violet said. You don't think those berries were poisoned, do you? Klaus said worriedly. No, Violet said. Olaf is after the fortune we will inherit. Killing us would do him no good. But what good does it do to have us be in his dumb play? I don't know, Violet admitted miserably. She stood up and started washing the oatmeal bowls. I wish we knew something more about inheritance law, Klaus said. I'll bet Count Olaf has cooked up some plan to get our money, but I don't know what it could be. I guess we could go ask Mr. Poe about it, Violet said doubtfully, as Klaus stood beside her and dried the dishes. He knows all those Latin legal phrases. But Mr. Poe would probably call Count Olaf again, and then he'd know we were on to him. Klaus pointed out, maybe we should try to talk to Justice Strauss. She's a judge, so she must know about the law. But she's also Olaf's neighbor, Violet replied, and she might tell him that we had asked. Klaus took off his glasses, which he often did when he was thinking hard. How could we find out about the law without Olaf's knowledge? Book! Sunny shouted suddenly. She probably meant something like, would somebody please wipe my face? But it made Violet and Klaus look at each other. Book! They were both thinking the same thing. Surely Justice Strauss would have the book on inheritance law. Count Olaf didn't leave us any chores to do, Violet said, so I suppose we are free to visit Justice Strauss in her library. Klaus smiled. Yes, indeed, he said. And you know, today, I don't think I'll choose a book on wolves. Nor I, Violet said, on mechanical engineering. I think I'd like to read about inheritance law. Well, let's go, Klaus said. Justice Strauss said we could come over soon, and we don't want to be standoffish. To mention the word that Count Olaf had used so ridiculously, the Baudelaire orphans all laughed. Even Sunny, who of course did not have a very big vocabulary. Swiftly they put away the clean oatmeal bowls in the kitchen cupboards, which watched them with painted eyes. Then the three young people ran next door. Friday, the day of the performance, was only a few days off, and the children wanted to figure out Count Olaf's plan as quickly as possible. Chapter 7. There are many, many types of books in the world, which makes good sense, because there are many, many types of people, and everybody wants to read something different. For instance, people who hate stories in which terrible things happen to small children should put this book down immediately. But one type of book that practically no one likes to read is a book about the law. Books about the law are notorious for being very long, very dull, and very difficult to read. This is one reason why many lawyers make heaps of money. The money is an incentive. The word incentive here means an offered reward to persuade you to do something you don't want to do. To read long, dull, and difficult books. The Baudelaire children had a slightly different incentive for reading these books, of course. Their incentive was not heaps of money, but preventing Count Olaf from doing something horrible to them in order to get heaps of money. But even with this incentive, going through the law books in Justice Strauss's private library was a very, very, very hard task. Goodness, Justice Strauss said when she came into the library and saw what they were reading. She had let them into the house, but immediately went to the backyard to do her gardening, leaving the Baudelaire orphans alone in her glorious library. I thought you were interested in mechanical engineering, animals of North America, and teeth. Are you sure you want to read those enormous law books? Even I don't like reading them, and I work in the law. Yes, Violet lied. I find them very interesting, Justice Strauss. So do I, Klaus said. Violet and I are considering a career in law, so we are fascinated by these books. Well, Justice Strauss said, Sunny can't possibly be interested. Maybe she'd like to come help me with the gardening. Whippy! Sunny shrieked, which meant I'd much prefer gardening to sitting around watching my siblings struggle through law books. Well, make sure she doesn't eat any dirt, Klaus said, bringing Sunny over to the judge. Of course, said Justice Strauss. We wouldn't want her to be sick for her big performance. Violet and Klaus exchanged a look. Are you excited about the play? Violet asked hesitantly. Justice Strauss's face lit up. Oh, yes, she said. I've always wanted to perform on stage, ever since I was a little girl. And now Count Olaf has given me the opportunity to live my lifelong dream. Aren't you thrilled to be a part of the theater? I guess so, Violet said. Of course you are, Judge Strauss said, stars in her eyes and Sunny in her hands. She left the library, and Violet and Klaus looked at each other and sighed. She's stage struck. Klaus said, she won't believe that Count Olaf is up to something, no matter what. She wouldn't help us anyway, Violet pointed out glumly. She's a judge, and she would just start babbling on about in loco parentis like Mr. Poe. That's why you've got to find a legal reason to stop the performance, Klaus said firmly. Have you found anything in your book yet? Nothing helpful, Violet said, glancing down at the piece of scrap paper in which she'd been taking notes. 50 years ago, there was a woman who had left an enormous sum of money to her pet weasel, and none to her 3 sons. The 3 sons tried to prove that the woman was insane, so the money would go to them. What happened, Klaus asked. I think the weasel died, Violet replied, but I'm not sure. I have to look up some of the words. I don't think it's going to help us anyway, Klaus said. Bless you. Maybe Count Olaf is trying to prove that we're insane so he'd get the money, Violet said. But why would he be making us be in the marvelous marriage to prove we were insane, Klaus asked. I don't know, Violet admitted. I'm stuck. Have you found anything? Around the time of your weasel, lady, Klaus said, flipping through an enormous book he had been reading, a group of actors put on a production of Shakespeare's Macbeth, and none of them wore any clothing. Violet blushed. You mean they were all naked on stage? Only briefly, Klaus said, smiling. The police came and shut down the production. I don't think it's very helpful either. It was just pretty interesting to read about. Violet sighed. Maybe Count Olaf isn't up to anything, she said. I'm not interested in performing in his play, but perhaps we're all working out about nothing. Maybe Count Olaf really is trying to welcome us into the family. How can you say that? Klaus cried. He struck me across the face. But there's no way he can get hold of our fortune just by putting us in a play, Violet said. My eyes are tired from reading these books, Klaus, and they aren't helping us. I'm going to go help Justice Strauss in the garden. Klaus watched his sister leave the library and felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him. The day of the performance was not far off, and he hadn't even figured out what Count Olaf was up to, let alone how to stop him. All his life, Klaus had believed if you read enough books, you could solve any problem. But now, he wasn't so sure. You there! A voice coming from the doorway startled Klaus out of his thoughts. Count Olaf sent me to look for you. You are to return to the house immediately. Klaus turned and saw one of the members of Count Olaf's theater troupe, the one with the hooks for hands, standing in the doorway. What are you doing in this musty old room anyway? He asked in his croak of a voice, walking over to where Klaus was sitting. Narrowing his beady eyes, he read the title of one of the books. Inheritance Laws and Its Implications, he said sharply. Why are you reading that? Why do you think I'm reading it? Klaus said. I'll tell you what I think. The man put one of his terrible hooks on Klaus's shoulder. I think you should never be allowed inside this library again, at least until Friday. We don't want a little boy getting big ideas. Now where's your sister and that hideous baby? In the garden, Klaus said, shrugging his hook off his shoulder. Why don't you go get them? The man leaned over until his face was just inches from Klaus's, so close that the man's features flickered into a blur. Listen to me very carefully, little boy, he said, breathing out very foul steam with every word. That means his breath was stinky. The only reason Count Olaf hasn't torn you limb from limb is that he hasn't gotten a hold of your money. He allows you to live while he works out his plans. But ask yourself this, you little bookworm. What reason will he have to keep you alive after he has your money? What do you think will happen to you then? Klaus felt an icy chill go through him as the horrible man spoke. He had never been so terrified in all his life. He found that his arms and legs were shaking uncontrollably as if he were having some sort of fit. His mouth was making strange sounds like Sonny always did, and he struggled to find something to say. Klaus heard himself say, When the time comes, the hook-handed man said smoothly, ignoring Klaus's noises, I believe Count Olaf might just leave you to me. So if I were you, I'd start acting a little nicer. The man stood up again and put both of his hooks in front of Klaus's face, letting the light from the reading lamps reflect off the wicked-looking devices. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to fetch your poor orphan siblings. Klaus felt his body go limp as the hook-handed man left the room. He wanted to sit there for a moment and catch his breath, but his mind wouldn't let him. This was the last moment in the library, and perhaps his last opportunity to foil Count Olaf's plan. But what to do? Hearing the faint sounds of hook-handed man talking to Justice Strauss in the garden, Klaus looked frantically around the library for something that could be helpful. Then, just as he heard the man's footsteps heading back his way, Klaus spied one book and quickly grabbed it. He untucked his shirt and put the book inside, hastily retucking it just as the hook-handed man re-entered the library, escorting Violet and carrying Sonny, who was trying without success to bite the man's hooks. I'm ready to go, Klaus said quickly, and walked out the door before the man could get a good look at him. He walked quickly ahead of his siblings and hoped that nobody would notice the book-shaped lump in his shirt. Maybe, just maybe, the book Klaus was smuggling could save their lives. Before you start working on your packet, you did the vocabulary up front. Inside. The first part is pretty basic. You've got your 4 questions again. Why did Count Olaf cook oatmeal with raspberries and serve as bowlers at the beginning of chapter 6? Cite text evidence to support your responses. That means find your answers from inside the book. Don't go making up stuff that you think he wants to get an ad or a commercial selling oatmeal, so he's practicing. Kellen.
For that one, do we have to write the page number?
Yes, anytime it says cite text evidence, you need page numbers.
Can I use the rest?
Go ahead. Count Olaf asked the children to perform with him. Why do you think he insisted the children participate? Cite specific evidence from the story to support your response. If you've read the story, you can only use information that's already happened in what we've read. Does that make sense? If you've already read it or watched it, you have to stick with what you know. Why do you think the children did not tell Justice Strauss about Count Olaf? And explain your reasoning. Think about the personalities of each of the Baudelaire children, Violet, Klaus, and Sonny. Which character is most like you? Why? Provide 2 reasons. So you can pick any of those 3, but you need to give good reasons why they are most like you. This one is kind of a fun activity where you get to create a wanted poster for the guy with the hooks. Up here, you find some text details. Like this is like your rough draft. What do you want to, he has hook hands, that should go here. He has stinky breath, that should go here. Things about him can go here, and here you make the actual wanted poster. Remember in City of Embers, there was a wanted poster hung up all over for Lena and Dune? This is a wanted poster. You're making one for the hook-handed man. The vocabulary on the back. I know this has not been our favorite. Everybody look on the back. You should know what many of these words mean. You have already looked them up. 4 of them are on the front of this page probably. Use the ones you know first and go from there. Fair enough? All right, cut. You have